Welcome back to this episode of Japan's top business interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, president of Dale Carnegie Training, Tokyo, Japan. My special guest today is an old friend of mine, Hans Heijligers. Welcome, Hans. So you are running a big operation here in Japan. So tell us a little bit about what it is you do and how long you've been here, et cetera, et cetera. Let's get to that sort of detail.
Well, thanks, and thanks for the invite, and thanks for having me. Really good to be here. We are in Japan since 2006. Well, in fact, we've been in Japan much longer than that. But we're in Japan since 2006 on a much bigger scale when we started our joint venture with ANA, the airline.
Right.
We took over a large portion of their hotels at the time, and since then we've been growing. So currently, we have a joint venture, IHG ANA in Japan. That part I'm the CEO of, but basically for IHG I'm the head of Japan, looking after our 37 hotels that we have under operation here.
Oh, okay.
So we've grown substantially over the last 2-3 years. For a long time we were stuck at about 30 hotels, which was the initial inheritance of the of ANA and of the joint venture. And since then, we've opened a few new ones, and we continue to open a few new ones, as many may have seen in the media recently. So 37 as it is today. We brought in some of our new brands. So IHG globally, we have 16 brands in the luxury and in the premium space and in the more mainstream space. And in Japan, we've introduced, in addition to our Intercontinental, Crowne Plaza and Holiday Inn brands, we've recently added Kimpton, which is the Kimpton in Shinjuku. We've added the Hotel Indigo brand, the first one in Hakone, Gora. We're opening 2 more in Karuizawa and in Inuyama early next year. And we will continue to introduce...
Taking over the world. How many people are we talking about? This must be a huge number of people in the group.
So our office here, the office that we support all these hotels with contains about 50 people, where we have all various functions represented. So to make sure that we bring to life the IHG engine room that benefits the owners and the operators. And then across Japan, we must have... under normal circumstances, around 5,000 people in those hotels.
That's serious. That's serious.
Running these businesses, yeah.
That's serious. So, Hans, how did you get to be here in Japan doing this? I mean, why are you here? How did you get here? Tell us the background.
That's a good question. I haven't thought about that for a while, but I've been here 7 years altogether. I came here in 2014. At the time, I was working for another organization in Singapore. I'm basically I would say a hotelier by birth, but that's not entirely true. But I've been doing this for quite some time. This is my, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's my 12th or 13th country that I've been in. And basically, when I was working in Singapore, somebody indirectly brought me in touch with the then the CEO of IHG for Asia Pacific. They were looking for somebody to come and take over a small part of Japan, not entirely Japan, based in our Intercontinental Osaka. And I decided to take on the role. And then my predecessor left shortly after I arrived. And then they asked me if I wanted to take over this role. And that's just, it kind of just rolled out like that. So probably
the cream
a little bit of
rises to the top, as we say, naturally.
A little bit luck and fortune, I guess, but yeah, no.
Well, 12, 13 countries, and you've been running teams across the world, basically, in different dimensions, different companies, right? When you started running a team in Japan, what were some of the things you noticed were a bit different here or challenging here?
Yeah, so, it's such a good question. All my life, I've always been saying the one thing that all countries have in common is that they're all different, and they're all unique. People often say and single out Japan as being very unique, and I think in many ways that's true. But yet, when it comes to cultural adaptation and ability to lead teams and to work in different cultures, the approach to it. Their approach to it remains similar, if that makes any sense. With the only difference is that the older you get, the more experience you get, hopefully, at some point in time, you get better at it, right? And the early day mistakes that you make because of the euphoria of working abroad and, oh, this is great, I'm here or there, whatever it was that I was, you go like, oh, that's great, and the energy and all that's fantastic, but you make some mistakes, you do. And as you grow older and as you get around, hopefully some of those mistakes get ironed out.
So that means that when you got here, you were pretty well prepped to deal with Japan. You didn't know Japan particularly, hadn't been here before to work here. So this sort of background got you in a good position to run a team in Japan, or it was like starting something afresh? I think
that there's a dual approach. I think you always need to come back in and saying this is something completely new. This is something I don't know. That's definitely part of the approach I think you must take, because otherwise you're not giving the destination or the new culture the opportunity to really play into you in the way that you should. You can't come in with preconceived ideas and say, oh, I got this, right? Because you don't. You definitely don't.
Well, what was that like though? Because I remember years and years ago, Heinz Schwander was the Hilton GM when I was in Nagoya. And he'd been, he'd opened Hiltons right throughout Asia. He'd worked in, like you, in the hotel business his whole life. And he could really compare. He could compare every task in the hotel and he'd say, well, I can compare that against Thailand. I can compare that against Shanghai. I can compare that against, wherever. So he had this in his mind. He was always judging the Japanese team against what he thought, they should have been doing. Yeah. So when you get here after 13 countries, are you going something in your mind thinking, well, okay, how would I think the Japanese should be performing compared to what I've seen somewhere else? Or is Japan just so totally different? You're like, oh, okay, this is so different. I've got to start again.
Well, I think in all fairness to any country I worked in, I think you have to give everybody, all these countries are intrinsically different and things are done in a different way and they will do it in their way. But I think the challenge that you have, particularly if you're a foreigner, you need to think about what value are you going to add. When you come to Japan, this is a first world nation. It's a very well developed nation. People are extremely well educated. The culture is rich and so incredibly developed that you really need to step back a little bit and say, okay, hang on, this is different from anywhere else where I was, right? But
what were things that are different? This is what we're looking for. What was the difference? If you come in with fresh set of eyes, vast experience, fresh set of eyes, you get here and you go, oh, that's different, or that's interesting, or that's a challenge. What were those sort of things that popped in your mind?
I think the way that I've approached this, Greg, is that there's two things. You have when you come to Japan, there's a culture of Japan which is very rich, and which is very attractive, and what most people really feel attracted by when they talk about Japan. And then there's the business culture and the way that we do business, right? Which is in a sense the way it's different because it's very Japanese owned. It's something in its own right. Mm-hmm. It's developed over years and years and years and years, hundreds of years, or I don't know how long, or decades, and it's very intrinsic and it's very typical for the way they do business here. That in itself is different from what I've seen anywhere else. So I think, but rather than singling out what really is the difference is the challenge is as leaders, okay, my value add is what exactly? The culture is the culture. I can't change that. And I have no intent to change that. On the contrary.
Well, good luck changing it.
Yeah.
Let me know how that gets on.
I'm going to enjoy it to as much as I can, right? But the business culture, there is an opportunity to find ways and means of help that become a little bit more progressive. And how can we integrate the business culture into something a little bit more contemporary, potentially, if you like, yeah, without taking away its, because there's some really good things about it. So don't forget, there's some really good things about it, right? But there are some things about it that we could possibly do a bit better.
And that's probably absolutely guaranteed for, I think, every senior executive who starts working in Japan. They bring something, otherwise why are they here?
Yeah.
How about on the other receiving end, though? Because I think for a lot of Japanese people who are working in multinational corporations, you come in normally 3 years and you go out. So often people come in, they've got certain ideas. The Japanese team don't particularly think they're very good ideas.
Right.
And they reject them basically, and they do nothing over 3 years, and they just wait for this person to leave. But you come in and you see there's an opportunity to take this to a more sophisticated level, a bit more progressive level. How do you go about persuading people who've been working here their whole lives, immersed in the culture, immersed in the language, immersed in the client base, to say, hey, there's another possibility here, why don't we look at doing it this way? How do you get them to come on board for that?
You almost answered the question. You have to work with the people, right? You can design an agenda and a strategy, and you can try to drive it the hard way, and very soon you'll discover that there's nobody on the bus with you, right? The one thing that the Japanese, so you need to start finding the common grounds in the Japanese business culture that works for your agenda or your strategy, right? One thing that is very strong in Japan is the collaborative way of decision making, right? Now, you can't take that away. You can't change that. And why would you? Because even in our maybe more Western way of doing business, we like empowerment. Yeah. The only difference is in the collaborative way of the process is that the decision making still sits somewhere else. So we have the tendency, we would like to lower the decision-making profile, right, in our organizations, because if we can do that, we can make more decisions faster, right? Now that's probably a little bit difficult, yeah, but the collaborative element is essential because they're really good at that, yeah. And if you allow the Japanese teams to have their own conversations, and if you're comfortable enough to say, okay, I don't need to be part of that, yeah. The only thing I need to do is to help the conversation on the way. Yeah, I can then take a step back or a step aside and say, come back when you want to talk again, right? And start slowly but surely building a culture around that. Yeah, is what I think a small potential element to some success. Now, the thing, and you mentioned that, the thing is you can't do in 2 or 3 years.
No.
Yeah. The Japanese have one other thing that the Westerners do not necessarily have. They have a lot of patience. Yeah,
Different time frames.
different time frames and all that. And again, how can you use that to help your agenda or your strategy on the way? So I think, I'm probably the best or maybe the worst example, because your initial thoughts is, okay, I've got to change that, I've got to fight that. I mean, don't. Yeah, because that is, you're not going to win that, because some people are just going to wait until you're gone and the next one comes in. Again, they have more patience than you have, right?
They live here.
They live here. It's their country. It's not my country, right? And so I think it's not looking for the differences. It's looking for the common grounds. Now, and you might have to dig a bit deeper for that, but there is some of that. Yeah. Another one, which is a bit more easier to find, actually, if you look at labor legislation in Japan, it's very Western. So I've worked in Europe, I've worked with unions in France and all that. It's very common, very similar. And their thinking is very similar. So there's a lot of similarities. So if you want to deal with that, just, you'll find a lot of parallels there in that space. So, and maybe that's my learning of my personal learning of traveling around, is that when you want to add value, you need to find the common ground, because you can only add where there is commonality. You can't add where there's difference. If there's conflict, nobody's listening. Yeah?
You could have the greatest idea in the world and no one's signing
Nobody's
up.
listening. Yeah. But where you have commonality, and then obviously in Japan an incredibly important part is trust, and relationships. When there's that, then there is potential, right? But yeah, it's a long breath. It's not going to happen in year 1, 2, and 3. And so, and you know this better than I do, all the articles that are written about expats coming into Japan and out of Japan, and what are the do's and the don'ts and what have you. I'm not the one that's going to write that book, because I'm not qualified to do so. But for me personally, it's really about, and that's, for me personally, that's about growing up, is look for where's the common ground, because on the common ground, you can nurture and you can build ideas. You can't nurture and build on conflict.
It's interesting you say that about the 3-year period. I always have this metaphor that when you arrive in Japan, new to Japan, it's like you've been placed in this fog-encased lake, and you're swimming around in the lake. It's a warm lake, so you're not freezing, but you're swimming around this warm lake, and you can sort of make out shapes and you can hear things, but you can't see anything clearly after year 1, you know. Year 2, you start to see, oh, there's an island over there. Oh, there are trees, you know. You start to see some landmarks. And year 3, the fog lifts and they say, okay, your next posting is somewhere else, you know, and you're out. And it takes that 3-year period to really start to understand how things work here. And then you're rolled out to another country. So you never quite get the opportunity. But you've been here 7, so you've been, you know, very fortunate to be going through that first 3-year period and then go into that next 4-year period where you can actually maximise the things that you've learned and understood in that, as you say, not the conflict, but to find ways of adding that's in the collaborative realm. So what things have worked for you that have come out of that process?
Well, and maybe before I go there, a few things that I may want to add that come to mind, right, is 2 things that I think that I've learned personally from Japan is that, first of all, Japan, and a little bit to your lake metamorphosis, is that Japan is not so much about what you see, it's a lot about what you don't see. And then get comfortable with that. So learn to get comfortable with being uncomfortable sometimes. Because you're not really ever on the in.
No.
But it's okay. You just got to learn to be comfortable. And of course, if you speak the language, it helps, but you're still not going to be on the in because you're not Japanese, and that's fair. And sometimes we think, oh, but that's not in Europe, or that's not the case. It's not really true, right? So you got to be.
Is that the same you feel in Europe? Same?
Well, I haven't worked in Europe for a long, long time, but I think before we judge, we need to look back in our own backyard, and we're not perfect either, right? So I think the more you leave it within its own value, the more advantage you will take out of it, because you're not here to disrupt them, or the culture or Japan. You're here to add value. That's the mission, right?
And often, though, people are sent here to fix Japan. You know, like the Japanese operation is not progressing as we expected. They fire the president, send whoever into Japan with the list. Okay, you want the revenues up, get this fixed, your job's on the line here, make it happen. So people are sent here with that type of posting requirement. So their mind is thinking very much in the control. How do I get Japan and just get in a headlock so it'll do what I want it to do? So for those sort of people, I think it's going to be heartbreaking because they can do as much as they like to try and change it. No. Not going to change. So what can those people do you think?
Well, I mean, you need to a few things that we all know, right? Let's be clear here, right? It's the 3rd economy in the world, the 3rd largest economy in the world. There's not much broken here, right? And they did that without you and me. So let's be very clear here, right? Yeah. So we're not here to teach or bring a lesson to Japan, right? If you're here on behalf of an organization or a foreign organization that is based here or whatever your role is, but you're a foreigner, right? Your reason for being here is to add value, to your organization, but also to Japan. Add value, which means don't create conflict. You're supposed to add value, right? And that is the hard work. It's a hard grind, but that is not different from anywhere else, to be honest. It is just that the Japanese culture is quite strong in its expression, and it's very clear and it's very obvious in everything that you see and do every single day. I mean, I was talking to a colleague of mine who just left, who was here for 3 years, and he was going back to Holland. Actually, he's from Holland, and we were sitting and having a coffee somewhere, and I said, look around you, all the things you're going to miss about Japan, right? And there's so many if you leave here, right? And it sometimes, thank God it actually overshadows sometimes the very hard work and sometimes the frustrations you need to go through. There's the beauty that sits against that, right? But To your point, so your head office sends you here with a mission, say, hey, go change Japan, and whatever it is, right? I think that you first need to have a conversation with your head office, but you don't know that unless you've been here, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a catch-22, right?
It's a catch-22. Yeah. So articulating your thoughts to your senior leadership team wherever they're sitting, and engaging them in the conversation around Japan, is very, very important. Close engage them, because it's not like, okay, Craig, you just go change all that in Japan, and we'll call you in 3 months and it's done, right?
Yeah.
You need to go back and say, hang on, guys, it's not that. We will do what we need to do. Let's talk about the agenda. Let's talk about the strategy. It's not about giving up on what you want to achieve. It's just that you need to be aware that the road towards it is going to be different.
Going to be different. Yeah. If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. So, you've got 5,000 odd people here, a headquarter team, 50 people. How do you get people engaged? Because, I've worked in multinational corporations where we have these engagement surveys and it's always the same thing. APAC's always the lowest in the world. Japan's always the lowest in APAC. And there's a lot of pressure from outside to say, well, look, the Japanese are not engaged. What are you doing over there? Get them engaged. So when you think about the teams, what do you think about engagement? Do you think Japanese team members are engaged, or that they're just engaged in a different way, or they're basically, they're not particularly engaged? What do you think?
I think being engaged to them means something different than it means to us, maybe. Yeah. And so that could be...
What do you think it means?
That could be one. Well, very often, I hate to do this, but let's do this for illustration's sake, right? So I think engaged in a Western culture very often is based on enthusiasm, on passion, on having some kind of a connection to the bigger corporate and the business in an emotive way. Mm-hmm. Yep. In Japan, it's way more based on relationships and loyalty. Mm-hmm. It could at times be a lot less passionate and a lot less emotive, but it's out of sense of duty, obligation, and of trust and integrity, right? Both are good. They just turn out to be different in scores. Because the way that we ask the questions are very emotive based, whereas the Japanese are not necessarily looking at it in that way, right? So that could make your scores a little bit disjointed. I mean, within IHG in Japan, we've made huge progress over the last 5-6 years, not my doing, mainly the doing of really great general managers that we have in the hotels that are really engaged with the IHG culture of how our people culture, which is an engaging culture, and which, if we can, make some inroads of making that work in Japan, we clearly get some results. But I think, you need to help your head office to understand that life is not just about scores. It is, what do you read between the lines here, right?
So you talk about your people are doing a good job. What are they doing? What are they doing to build that engagement, build that connection, build that ISG?
I think the role that we need to do as a leadership team is to really engage them with what is important to us as an organization, and how do we adapt that to this environment? How do we make that relevant to the people that work with us, right? Knowing what we know. So very emotive versus very loyal and high level of integrity, but it's more for a lifetime kind of thing. How do we adapt that? And I think that's just, and actually the differences are very small, because the way that we engage people everywhere else in the world in our organization, yeah, is not necessarily purely emotive.
No.
It's quite substantial. It's got substance, yeah, and it's got a lot of relevance. So what you need to do is just read properly between the lines and start identifying the things that the Japanese audience can identify themselves with. We don't have to rewrite the book at all. We operate hotels in 100 nations and some, right? And we do it in all languages, and we use the same book, right? And it works, right? And it also works in Japan. All you need to do is to work with your leadership team and engage them on the right level, that they are comfortable in talking about that culture, interpreting it, and that's the work, yeah. And then they will become the ambassadors for the business, right? To the colleagues, but also to the owners of our hotels, right? Because obviously our real estate is owned by various owners, and they need to be equally engaged in that culture, because that's what they pay us to do, right?
You know, you're in a people business, right? So it's all about human relations, it's all about communication skills, it's all about connecting, understanding what people want. So you would think that given all of that, and given you're all grown up in that world, in your careers, that you would all be geniuses at leading people, because you are focused on the customer engagement, and the staff engagement is not that different. It's just they're just got a different role, but the way you operate, the way you speak with people, the way you encourage people, the way you listen to people, the way you try and find out, you know, what's going on with that person. I'm sure that playbook is exactly the same for the client or customers as is for the team. So do you find that your teams are particularly good people?
Oh, they are, definitely. And the way that we, in our industry and in our business, and certainly within IHG, that we always look at it, we have obviously various stakeholders, right? We have our colleagues, we have our owners, we have our customers, yeah, and we have the greater IHG. So we deal with multiple stakeholder management as customers all the time, and then we have our B2B customers as well, right? And I think. I would love to believe that we're experts at it. I think we're pretty good at it. Otherwise, you don't grow to be an organization as we are. But we are also aware that this is a continuous learning curve, right? Because the world around us changes very quickly. The needs of all those customers change all the time. Yeah? Owners have changed over the years. The actual consumer, the actual customer has changed of how they look at our business.
What about your staff demands? Have they changed? We're going through a bit of a generational...
They have changed. Of course they have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what sort of things are different now?
I think people's expectation of careers and job opportunities within the business change. People have become, certainly if you look at the new generations coming up, they're very ambitious. Yeah. And they very quickly want to know, okay, what's the next thing for me, right? Where do I go, right? And our business has changed. So so personally, I come very much from an operational background. I started small. I was a commis chef in a hotel where I grew to do this job. I would argue that although that is still possible, it probably is a lot harder these days, because we require way more qualifications that I needed to catch up with over my years and do site studies and night studies and all that to keep track. These days, people enter our business with a good, solid business degree of some sort. Yeah? They are not going to be a waiter or a receptionist for a very long time.
No.
Right? And so you need to have a real good understanding, how do we build career path for people? How do we help people progress in their careers? And thank God in our industry, that is something we can do. And we collaborate with great educational institutions from Cornell to Harvard and all that we can help our people to become great leaders in this business.
The thing, though, always struck me as interesting is that you think about, it's an international business. Hoteliers can work anywhere in the world like you have done. How many Japanese GMs are there working outside of Japan, I wonder? Well, it's not a real question, but my point is, I would suggest it's a very, very, very small number. Now, you always talk about the Swiss seem to have a preponderance of Swiss hoteliers, particularly as one particular nation. It's very well known. But in the other way, Japanese are not very well known. You do get Japanese GMs in Japan working for domestic hotels, but international hotels, I don't know. I'm trying to think, are there any Japanese GMs working in international hotels here?
So there are. Probably not as prominent as some nationalities that you typically find in that space. But there are. So let's certainly not say that they're not, because there are. As a matter of fact, we know very well where they are, because we would love to bring some talent back. And to your point, I mean, geez, would we not all love to export some of Japanese hospitality abroad, right? Because we are spoiled to death here when it comes to
So what's the
service and all
problem?
that.
Why aren't we seeing more of these talented people working overseas?
I think that goes a little bit back to the the Japanese general managers and senior leaders that I've worked with abroad, and there's quite a few of them. In fact, I was speaking to one earlier today. Have been very successful. So they're very good because they do bring that extra that most of us Westerners don't have. They have this incredible service, relationship, integrity element to a dialed up level that we hardly understand, right? And if they make that work in the international space, oh my God, they're so good, right? They're really, really good. And I wish there was more of those. I think it goes a little bit back to the kind of intrinsic fear of failure sometimes, and probably limited risk for appetite for risk. Sorry, that we sometimes see in the culture. I think we're a little bit on a cyclical base, because there were more. So it's a bit on its way back. I think there were a lot more in the 90s and late 80s, early 90s. I think there was a lot more. I mean, don't forget A&A, for example, had their own hotels, and they had hotels in Vienna and New York and all over the world, right? And they had Japanese general managers there, and very successful ones. I know them. They still work for us in some instances, right? And they were very good. So yeah, it's a good question. If we can help it, we definitely would like to see. We actually see in our current estate here in Japan, I definitely see a few young general managers coming through, currently working for us, that definitely have the potential and the desire to go overseas.
That's great.
And we would definitely give them that opportunity, hands down, no issue.
Fantastic. And you talked before about engagement. It's a different, maybe, formation of it as we look at it here around loyalty, integrity, those sorts of things. One of the triggers for creativity is that you care. You know, if you don't actually care, who cares if it make it better? You just don't care. So the first thing to creativity, you have to care.
Yes.
So what do you do in your organisation? Because it's a very competitive business. It's a globally competitive business. To constantly being in the creative mode, to be competitive vis-a-vis all of the other hoteliers out there. What do you do in your company to be more creative?
Good question. I think just go back to the word care, because I think it's a really important part of what we need to get our head around. So care is, you need to ask yourself, care for what? If you care for your own well-being in the limelight, I would say just pack up your bags and leave. There's other places where you may be able to do that. Although, having said that, I think most senior leaders will agree with me that you're not here for yourself. So understand what you care for. And ultimately, one of the things that you should care for is that you're here to make lives better for people. Yeah? And very generically speaking, you're here to make people's life better. Whose people life? Well, the ones in your organization for sure, because that you can influence. Yeah, your customers for sure, your owners for sure, your stakeholders. Yes, so that's a very big purpose. So a lot of your innovation always needs to be driven by that, right? And so what sets us apart as international operators? Look, there's a lot of things we do similar, right? Let's be honest. But I think what sets us apart, and certainly within IHG, I would like to believe that our people culture is something we are very proud of. And when you say, well, what is that? Well, it's what we put behind it. It's not just a word say, well, we love our people, we care for our people. No, what we put behind it, our training tools, our development tools, the care programs that we put, the way we put our arms around our people through coaching sessions, mentoring, how we help really for diversity, equity, and inclusion to become integral part of everything that we do is huge for us. And so...
Where's the creativity aspect here? Because my interest here in this question is, how do you get creativity from the team? How do you become innovative as an organisation based on what your people come up with? So do you have any systems that you talk about, the toolkit? Do you have a toolkit for helping people to think innovatively about the service and the business that they deliver?
I think there's a few things that we need to look at in that space. I think one part is really how you, as a joined up leadership team, empower people to think freely about what they think innovation should look like in their workspace. And we started a few things here in Japan over the last couple of years, where we really want the hotel teams to think about, because we're in a lot of regional areas, and what works in Toyama might not work in Akita, might not work in Sapporo, might not work in Okinawa.
Right.
So it's very important that the general manager and the leadership teams in the hotels are the enablers for the teams on property to think creatively of what works best on hotel level. Systems and processes are all there.
Yes.
And they're always useful, but what people need to think about is, okay, but what works best here? And we've seen we've seen some incredible things happening in I mean, the list is long in so many aspects of how we found out to do things better. And the COVID-19 period has been no blessing in whatever way you want to call it, but it has triggered a lot of innovation, because we all of a sudden needed to do, we had no business. People were sitting at home often 2/3 of the time on special leave, et cetera, et cetera. People at the hotel level had to start multitasking. And all of a sudden we started realizing, oh, hang on, we're doing a lot of things that we shouldn't be doing, and we can do differently. Yeah? And so really the last 18 months have been probably, believe it or not, have been the most amazing when it comes to innovation.
Sort of forced creativity.
Forced creativity,
right,
yeah,
right.
When we had no choice. And this is where Japan is pretty good, right?
That's interesting. That's interesting.
And so we didn't have to inspire much, because people very quickly realized, okay, you're asking me to multitask, but I'm doing a task that we don't need to do anymore. Right. Because somebody else who was never involved in that was all of a sudden involved in it and looked at it with a completely different set of eyes and said, don't need for that, right? And we said, oh, good call. No need for that. Yeah. So when we get out of all this, we're probably a little bit more efficient.
More streamlined.
More streamlined. And
Have
certainly
there been any particular things? I take the point about, different regions are going to have a need for a creative solution for that particular customer base in that particular region. So those don't necessarily travel necessarily from one region to another, perhaps. But have there been any particular elements of creativity which have sort of come up through this process, or just in the 7 years you've been here, and you said, you know what, that is a really smart idea. We're going to take that worldwide.
Well, on a very, I'll give an example in a second, but I think the main driver for us in Japan was technology. So. Right. We as an organization we're loaded with technology, and technology is basically what our owners pay us fees for, right? Because the more automated and the more reach and global reach and the more technology and efficiency you can build into a business, the better it is for everybody, right? Because we inherited many hotels in Japan, we also inherited a lot of ways of working. And when life is normal and there's no COVID-19 around, and business is good, and performance has been progressing over the years, nobody necessarily looks behind the scenes and how many manual processes are still in place, or what, because it doesn't really matter.
When times are good, you're busy.
Now all that has come to the forefront and said, we don't have any more time to waste. And people actually picked it up themselves, and they said, okay, but if we don't do all of this anymore, then how is it going to get done? Well, I guess there's technology. We already had that. But you've been putting it on the side because you were more comfortable with the old ways of doing things, right? Now you don't have an option anymore. just take the piece of technology and use it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So it's really the application of technology that we already had mainly, but now really
driving it.
and owners and the stakeholders, everybody is seeing the advantage of it, right? Including travelers, because if you look at the Japanese traveler, and we're now completely a domestic market at the moment, and that will stay for a while, as we all know, right? The domestic market has had its way of traveling. They've become more digital than ever. They were already quite digital in Japan, let's not forget, but it's gone on overdrive, right? Because now it's no touch, no nothing, it's all digital. So we've seen the use of our app, of our IHG app, go up through the roof, right? People are now using it galore. So we've been adding technology into that app so they can do more on the app, which means they need to do less in the hotel, which means that the colleagues that are in the hotel can spend more time on actual interaction with the customer from a service perspective, rather than doing all kinds of administrative stuff around it that we don't need to do.
Great.
Right? So there's a lot of good stuff that comes out of as they say, never let a crisis go to waste, right? But
are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. Yes, I hope we've all managed to do that. Let's see, we'll soon find out in about a year's time. What about trust? You mentioned trust in the very first part of our conversation. Can you talk a little bit about what you've noticed about the importance of trust in Japan, and is that different in Japan to other places?
I think, and everybody can read up on this, right? I think if we look at how does business culture in Japan, how the business culture in Japan works, it's all about relationship, and the trust is built on how the relationship gets developed, and that relationship is not necessarily in the boardroom.
Right.
It's outside of the boardroom. It's very much based on the social interaction.
So by that you mean what? You mean drinks after work, golf? Do you mean karaoke? What are we talking about?
You're talking about that, right? It's where and you need to gauge the business partners that you have, right? I mean, if I look at our owners across Japan, right? They value that personal relationship, to have dinner together, to have a drink together. That's where the trust gets built. Now, if you look at COVID-19 and state of emergencies and limitations to travel and to visit and to see each other face to face, I think that for Japan business culture is very hard, right? It's very difficult because that is really cutting into the core of what sits at the foundation of the business culture, which is really the face-to-face interaction, and that's where the trust culture gets built, and it's so important for this business. A VC and a screen and a Teams call, whatever you do, is not going to cut it in Japan, right?
So what's happened? We're doing this for a year and a half now. So what's the upshot of it?
Well, you certainly will have to work it hard now, because two things happened. Obviously, if I take particularly our owners group, who are obviously really seeing the short stick of all this, because it's their cash that's affected, right?
That's right.
So they have the pain of having to see this through with funding their business from places that they never thought that they had to fund it from, right? And we supported that obviously as much as we can by reducing cost and by driving every possible commercial opportunity that we can, and to minimize the damage as much as we can, right? But I don't think we were in a position to drive the relationship to the extent that you would like to, right? Which is really, and that they would like to, because of the limitations of movement, right? So we really need to dial up on that now that we slowly but surely get out of this, and continue to build those relationships. I mean, we've got fantastic relationship with our owners.
I think
here,
also a relationship with the team, right? Like you've got GMs running teams, you've got teams in your headquarters, you're running them. What have you noticed about effective ways to build trust with the Japanese team over the 7 years that you've been here?
I mean, again, no doubt, at the foundation sits the relationship, and the relationship in the physical being together and spending time together. Right? It's irreplaceable in Japan. I don't think we can ever dream that would look anytime different anytime soon, because it also lives in the younger generation, right? So the working from home culture has somehow really caught on in Japan. I think people actually see some upside on that, and people with long commutes and all that, and actually starting to realize, hey, I can do all this from home. To a certain extent, has gained some traction, I would say. At the same time, I think there's definitely a desire to at least spend some time in the office and the social element of that. But I just think in Japan, and particularly to your point, we've got hotels, they're people, and for them not to see as much of us maybe from time to time as they used to is certainly not. I think we're all in need of bringing that back very quickly and have those interactions. But at the same time, a big shout out. I think our general managers have been fantastic in these are very stressful roles, because let's not forget. We always talk about and I have to really put a word out for those guys, because we always talk about the people that are in the medical and of course the frontliners, as we call them. But our hotel people are also frontliners. They go to work every single day, and there's still customers every single day. They are exposed as anybody else, yet they've gone to work every single day over the last 18 months without hesitation. Wow. And they've been incredible, right? So those teams have just been enormous. Of course, we have been connecting through video conferencing. We hold our team talks, and there's so many medias and forums that we've used, and I think it has worked to a certain extent. But I think Japan is no different from anywhere else in the world. I think everybody is missing the social aspect.
Yes.
When was the last time you and I spoke and had a coffee, right? So
haven't had a coffee, haven't had a meal,
correct,
haven't even had anything.
We used to bump into each other once a week at least. Exactly. Right?
Exactly.
And so I think there's some damage control that needs to happen in general, right? Not just in general, just bringing social contacts back to our daily routines, right? And it's not for the faint-hearted, and that's not a Japanese thing. That's a global thing.
So if you were going to give some advice to someone who's going to be sent to Japan on a posting, they don't know Japan, they're just arriving here, looking back over your 7 years of experience, what would be some advice you'd have for them?
Maybe I said it earlier, but the first thing I would really do, read up, and I'm not going to sit here with you. You've got enough books, but do some smart reading on Japan. History is important here. Yeah, like all other countries, by the way, you can understand things based on historical facts, right? But it's everywhere the same.
Yep.
But Japan has its own history, so read up on it, understand some of it, come in with a really open mind, and do not be in a hurry to drive down your agenda people's throat and think that you're going to achieve it in that way. Yeah? Try to understand a little bit about the Japanese business culture. We all did 7 Habits at some point in time. It's an old training, but understand before being understood comes to mind as an important element of how you step in here. And then as you get on, really learn to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Do not expect to be included all the time. You won't be. It's okay. Give people their space. Yeah. Allow them to have their own conversations on their own terms. Yeah. And take an interest. Listen. Yeah. Ask questions. Listen. Ask questions. Ask again. Yeah. Multiple times. Have some patience. Yeah. But at the same time, be clear about what you want to achieve. Don't be afraid of sharing what you want to achieve. Yeah? Absolutely. People love to understand what they're working for. They really do. They're highly educated people. They want to understand what they're working for. What's your objective? What's your target? What's your purpose? Yeah. But they also want to know you personally. Yeah. So be vulnerable as a leader. Be very comfortable with being vulnerable. Open up, and ultimately, really core principles of what we all have learned over the years in leadership is that when it goes wrong, it's your fault.
Yep.
When it goes well, you got nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
And just accept that. That's how it is. And that's how it should be in leadership, because we have to be responsible for everything that doesn't go well. Yeah? And everybody else needs to be celebrated when things go well.
Well, on that excellent note, thank you very much for joining me, Hans. This has been great. And please join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.